Hi, this is Jim Jubileer Results Group, and I'd like to welcome you to First Fridays, 27 minutes a month to break through results. And this month we're talking about abundance, which is a two-part series. This is the second of two parts based on information contained in a book by the same name. And I'll walk you through the entire setup and discussion of why we're talking about this. My goal for today is to inspire you to implement one of the practices that we're going to cover, and for you to then come back and tell me how you've implemented that practice and what came from it. We tend to overestimate what we can do in the short term, but we underestimate what we can do in the long term. And the story of abundance is very much about making strategic choices that have big upside outcomes. That's what we're working on. So let's dive in. And just a reminder to everybody on the webinar, please feel free to use the chat line to add any comments as you wish. I'm doing an all-day workshop on March 19th called Discover Your Why and Core Values. That's a workshop for CEOs, business owners, and their teams, Greenville, South Carolina. Next Monday, I'll be doing a Discover Your Why conference presentation at the Great Ideas Conference in Orlando, which is a conference for people that are members of the association industry. So there's an association of associations, and that's who I'll be speaking to. April First Fridays, I don't have it on the slide here, but we're going to be talking about the best practices in hiring and employee engagement. Many of my clients now are in hiring mode. Unemployment is plummeting. The war for talent is on, and we need to get the right people in the right seats. And that's what we'll be talking about that's in May. Our April First Fridays is going to be about grit, perseverance, developing a growth mindset, and what are the key competencies you need to develop personally and in your team. So you'll have more details on all of that. Stay tuned to your inbox. So you're on this call because you're interested in growing 10x, maybe even 100x. So not 10%. We know how to do 10%. But how do we do 10x? That's really what we're looking at in today's webinar. So if we were meeting in 1915, not 2015, 1915, and if we made a commitment to meet every year for the next 25 years, what would we see? The reason why I'm going to lead you through this exercise is because Peter Diamandis, the convener of the Abundance 360 Summit, has committed to running it for 25 years. And I attended the third year, year 3, so we have 22 more years of doing this. And we went through an exercise together about how different the future will look from today. And one way to do that is to look at how different the future looked going back in time. So if it was 1915, we'd have the rudimentary car, the Model T, etc. And by 1940, 25 years later, we would have what starts to look more like a modern automobile, although obviously not quite like what we have today. We would have radio. There was no television back then. But by 1940, TV had come in, which had a huge, massive disruption, probably the single biggest change in technology in the history of humanity. You would have had very early airplanes, and by 1940, you'd have the outline of the modern aviation industry with people moving about the country in a way that had never, ever happened before, also in the history of humanity. You would have some home appliances that were rudimentary, and then similar looking appliance, but much more modern. Same for washing, dishwashers and clothes washing. Still doesn't quite look like today, but you can see in those 25 years a massive leap forward. And in the evidence of abundance slide and in this work tracking abundance, we look at where is the future going. One of the fields of study in this discipline is called singularity. Singularity is a branch of computer science that's dedicated to figuring out when machine intelligence is going to surpass human intelligence. It's a bigger version of the Turing test, Turing, that if you're not familiar with, it was very beautifully documented in The Imitation Game, a movie that's out. The people involved with the singularity are thinking by 2040, which is not that far from now, machines will have the same intelligence that humans have. And I won't get into what does intelligence mean and how can a robot replace a human, all of that. But what we can say without a doubt is the world is going to look massively different. And so the abundance work comes from the field of singularity research. My mentor and teacher in this domain is a guy named Peter Diamandis, who wrote 2 books with his co-author, Stephen Kotler, who also is an amazing author in his own right. Abundance is the first book on the left, and I highly recommend you read it. Their new book called Bold is also wonderful, but I haven't even opened it yet because I have so much to study from what I learned from the summit. I'm going to be going away for a bit this summer, and I'm saving up Bold for when I can really sit at a beach and open up my mind to what the newest stuff is he's going to have to tell me. So I'm in a year-long program with Peter Diamandis. We had 3 days live at the Beverly Wilshire in January. We have a number of webinars ongoing throughout the year and 250 hand-picked entrepreneurs going through this program to study disruptive technologies. And that's what I'm sharing with you today. 2016's live Abundance Summit is already sold out. So if you're at all interested in going or thinking of going, talk to me or talk to them. But it was so popular that 80% of the people that were there this year have already rejoined for next year. Cool stuff. Picture of the ballroom, picture of me speaking to the audience and asking Peter a question. And what we are studying is that the world has a lot of problems. If you watch TV, you would think the world only has problems and no opportunities. So I coach my clients, if they don't have a positive mental attitude, some do, some don't, but if they don't, I encourage them, take a week off from following the news. TV news in particular is just ridiculous, not correct, not helpful. So pay attention to the media that you consume. If you want to become a billionaire, find a way to help 1 billion people. And I'm going to go through a number of examples of where that's actually happening. So in the slides you'll get is the link to the Evidence of Abundance slideshow as well, which I won't cover here during the talk. Last month in Abundance Part 1, I went into more detail about MTP, your massively transformative purpose. It's kind of like your why, but it's a little bit more grounded. It's a very big problem out in the world that you personally are very excited to solve. And it resonates both in your mind, your head, but more importantly, your heart, where decisions get made. When you're an organization and you have an MTP, it helps you attract the best and the brightest people who really do want to be working on moonshots. And it changes your company culture from just having an internal focus to having an external focus. And it can be something inspirational. An MTP is slightly different from, but it, in my mind, is relatively similar to what we call a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal, something that's truly industry transformative. In my business coaching program, we typically take up the BHAG, the MTP, in year 2. In year 1, we're laying the foundation, we're getting the systems and processes, we're growing revenue, we're growing the team, we're getting all the foundational elements in place. And then and only then is a good time to turn to say, okay, I got this machine going, revenues are up, I can see 10x, either I'm achieving it or I could see that it's possible. Where do I want to go with this? So don't get too hung up on, what would my MTP be today? It takes some time to develop it. But companies that have developed it are the ones that are really going on to be creating great results and outcomes. So I went into MTP in a little bit more detail last month, but it was so important I wanted to repeat it here. Along with Peter's exponential framework, the 6D framework. If you want, listen to last month's webinar, I go into more detail. But the highlights are that we're in a period of rapid and radical transformation that's disruptive. What industry hasn't had massive disruption? I work with a couple of tradespeople and people that are in landscaping and in plumbing. I don't see a whole lot of change in the plumbing industry. But even my clients who are in the trades are doing automated scheduling software. The landscapers use GIS and satellite imagery to calculate the square footage of their clients' yards. So even in something as mundane as grass cutting, there are technological disruptions. I'll show you an example of dematerialization in a minute. Demonetize simply means you can get a lot of stuff now for free that you used to have to pay for. And industry after industry are being disrupted. One of the really, really exciting things about abundance and about this exponential framework is it really is leading to the more democratization. You can take a look at any kind of repressive regime in the world that used to be very effective in keeping its people repressed. There are still examples of that. I don't want to say it's not happening, but more and more people are getting access to freedom through access to information, and it's getting harder and harder to stop that. It's a tidal wave that's going to touch the entire world. When we talk about demonetization, we look at industry after industry. These new type of exponential organizations have wiped out entire industries. If I went in front of the San Francisco city government, it's about 5-6 years ago, and I said to them, right now there's 5 guys working in a basement on an app for an iPhone. And when it's done, they're going to destroy a third of your entire taxi industry in this city. They would have thrown me out. But if I would have gone on to say, and furthermore, those 5 guys in the basement with this stupid little app are actually going to generate 3 times more industry than your entire taxi industry is generating today. Not only would I have been thrown out, they would have kicked me a good one on the backside on the way out the door, and I'd have been laughed out of town. But in fact, that is exactly what has happened. Not only has Uber wiped out, not completely, but partially the taxi industry, it's gone on to create immense new value for people that are using transportation when previously they weren't even moving about. Just yesterday, my college-age son told me he's going to get involved with a new app. I think it's called Get Around or Get Around Cars. And you give your car to them. They install electronics, and it allows your car to be rented out like a zip car. And he can make $1,000 a month doing it, potentially. Depends on the location of the car and where it's located. But all of a sudden, owning a car is free and maybe even a revenue generator rather than an expense. Imagine how transformative that is. So we're seeing this in industry after industry. Dematerialization is near and dear to my heart because I'm an environmentalist and I'm very concerned about sustainability and global warming and climate change. And we're nowhere near taking it seriously enough for what needs to happen. So the degree to which we can get our needs met while using less materials is actually a good thing. So what you have here is a picture of me in front of a whole variety of technologies. A way to type, a way to listen to music, a way to watch videos, a way to have video conferences with other people. In 1975, all of this technology, along with the video conferencing stuff that would sit behind it, would have cost about $900,000. Today, it fits in the palm of my hand, and it's basically free. I mean, you pay money and you pay your data plan, so it's not totally free. But you get the point I'm making here. Massively transformative dematerialization, along with a rapid increase in the capabilities that live and exist right within the palm of our hand. So what I want to do right now, I'm going to load up another set of slides I want to show you, but I just want to pause, and I'm going to ask you to go into the chat room, to the chat feature, and type in either a question if you have one, or a comment about the material I've covered, either in terms of what does that mean for you, your industry, or how might you take advantage of this, just any kind of comment. Take a moment to put your chat comment in the chat box. So let me get a couple more comments on chat before I turn to talking about exponential organizations. The relationship between abundance and disruption, Abundance, the book, catalogs all the ways in which new technologies are disrupting our lives and disrupting old industries. The book Abundance draws from the field of singularity and a number of other fields. So really, these are different words or different lenses, but they're all talking about the way in which technology is changing things. And yes, it's true that technology dematerializes our life. If you look at my office, there's actually a great video. I don't have it right here, but it's a great video, and it shows a big cluttered desk. And there's a pile of papers, and the papers disappear, and a little icon of a PDF pops up. And a calculator's there, and it disappears, and the calculator app pops up. So it shows this big, crowded, messy desk, and over time, each of the things in it disappears, and what's left is a slim little MacBook Air laptop and one iPhone. And literally all of those things that used to take the entire desk are now contained in our electronics. So dematerialization is a huge factor. Today, you can take an order for an electric car that's built using 3D printing. There's no more factories. There's just a big version of an inkjet printer. Now, admittedly, the engine is not 3D printed, just the body, but really amazing transformation is happening. So what I want to talk about next is exponential organizations. This comes from a book by the same name called Exponential Organizations, and it's from a guy named Salim Ismail, who was at Yahoo. He now runs Singularity University, and he, like Peter Diamandis, is a polymath, wicked smart, awfully nice, great author, great speaker. I want to make let me make a comment too. There is a line of thinking which I subscribe to, which goes along the lines of, what does Uber have to do with me? You know, I'm just trying to get the next customer. I'm trying to grow my revenue by 100,000 by $1 million. What does all this high-tech stuff really have to do with me? And that's a bit of a struggle. So our challenge is to look at these ways of thinking, these frameworks, these concepts, but fit it to our particular situation. You may not be launching some massively transformative industry-killing app. And even if you do, that might be a real struggle. So your job today is to listen for how this might apply to you. I won't go through all of the stories. I assume that you're familiar with them, and if not, you can become familiar. I use Airbnb when I travel on business. It's fabulous. I use Uber all the time, Dropbox all the time. The list goes on and on about these companies that didn't even exist 5 years ago. It's really crazy. Apologize for the poor graphics. I actually stole Salim's slides from the conference. This just shows the rate of valuation increase in these exponential organizations, and it really is off the charts. TED is an example. Technology, Entertainment, and Design used to be just a conference. Then it got popular, so it became a sold-out, invitation-only conference. And the guy who took it over said, we want to make it more democratic for the world. And he exposed the TED Talks on the web, and there's now been over 1 billion with a B views of the TED events. So they've really turned TED, which was just a kind of a small conference, into a big conference, into a worldwide phenomenon. I won't go through each of these companies. You may be familiar with some of them. Quirky does product innovation. Some of these are technology-based. Some of them are consumer products-based. You're familiar with people like Airbnb. Waze is a traffic program. Valve is a software company. Tesla, obviously. Netflix. There's more, but those are just some. So I want to give you the key idea, and it's summarized in 2 acronyms. The first acronym is SCALE. SCALE refers to external characteristics that define an exponential organization. So we want to have staff as needed. I believe your first 10 people on the team, maybe your first 30 people, a lot of those go better being full-time. But even as you begin to grow, and then certainly if you get into hypergrowth, you want to turn to external sources to execute certain tasks. Odesk, Freelancer, I use a website called Fiverr. There's a lot of different ways you can quickly access third-party talent on a contract basis. You want to leverage the community, not just the company. Easier said than done. Indiegogo and Kickstarter are very much community-driven. People who care about a topic put up a project, they try to get funded, they promote it. So Kickstarter doesn't drive traffic to Kickstarter's site. The community on the site drives traffic to the site, and it builds a virtuous circle from there. SC. So the question for you is, how could you use a community? And by the way, community doesn't always mean a website. So this phone call is a community. First Fridays, month after month after month. I've been doing it for 4 years. Hundreds and hundreds of business owners have participated, sometimes just once, sometimes every month, and it grows from there, and it's actually creating a community. Facebook is a great place to house private groups. If you're a B2C player, there are very fantastic LinkedIn industry groups. So community can take a lot of different forms. But the question is, if you're creating buzz about your product, how do you get people to actually talk about it? Dave Schmidt on the call, who owns Green Beagle Lodge, has brilliant social media coverage on Facebook with the dogs slipping on the ice and swimming in the swimming pool. And if you're a pet owner in Chapel Hill and you're looking for a place to board your dog and you know about the Green Beagle Facebook page, you're hooked. You know, the community is there. It's very cool. Algorithms. What is the value of an algorithm? It has been calculated that PageRank, which basically is what Google's algorithm is that created everything that we know today, is worth $500 billion with a B dollars. That's what an algorithm's worth. Do you know why? Anybody on the phone know why UPS is on this page? I'll just pause for a sec. What's UPS's famous algorithm? Anybody know that story? It's actually an algorithm you can apply to your business, to your personal life. UPS created an app that limits the number of times their trucks have to make left-hand turns. Left-hand turns take much longer and are much more dangerous. And there's a way to send a truck out where it goes around everywhere where they limit the number of left-hand turns. And that algorithm has been worth billions with a B, billions of dollars to UPS. I'm going to skip through some of this. You'll have access to these slides as well as a link to the book reference as well. Lease instead of buy. Amazon Web Services allows you to have an entire e-commerce platform for virtually no money. Uber allows you to get around without a car. An Airbnb lets you stay in places without having to, own them. So more and more we're seeing these kind of leased on-demand assets that can be deployed with a click of a button being very effective at cost savings. And then finally, user engagement is very, very important. That could be the subject of its own First Friday's talk itself. But the way that you use gamification, the world of incentive prizes, there are many, many different ways to bring people in and get them engaged. It's also true that we live in an extremely noisy, crowded, attention-starved, time-starved world today. And so engagement is actually harder and harder to generate even as it becomes more important. And that dynamic tension between wanting to create engagement and yet everybody being pulled in 1,000 directions is a really tough challenge to solve. Not so simple to solve. Once again, I look at what I'm doing with the First Fridays series as an example of, I don't just send you content, I don't send you a link to a video, I put it on at a specific point in time, and you have to do something. You have to click in, register, click back in at the right time. I mean, you can listen to it afterwards, but most everybody listens to it live. And so I don't have thousands of people on each webinar, but the dozens of people I have are much, much more highly engaged than if they were just watching it as a YouTube replay. So live is a great way to build engagement, and I consider this to be a version of live. Then Salim goes on to say ideas are the internal characteristics that define an exponential organization. These are internal now, not external. The interface process refers to time management and efficiency, effectiveness, and productivity. Dashboards are essential because you're growing at such a pace that there has to be a way to keep track of what's happening. Another thing that's very important is that you ideally would like to run your organization flatter than typical hierarchical organizations have been run in the past. In the past, we used to think the span of control was 6 or 7, maybe 8, 9 people. In other words, after there was 10 people, you need to get a manager, and you need to grow from there, and you build layers of hierarchy, and it just gets bigger and bigger and more imponderous over time. Some of you may recall in the 1980s when companies did re-engineering and they started to downsize. You know, somebody like IBM let 24,000 people go, and I'm like, how do they still keep their, like, where did all that work go, and where did all the people go? Like, I couldn't imagine it. But now that I'm inside those kind of companies, I can see how much waste there is. So we're looking to figure out ways to grow but stay flat, at least somewhat flat, if not super flat. I'm going to pause and just catch my breath and invite you to chat in again any questions, comments, etc., just to make sure you're tracking, and I'm tracking to what your thinking is. Take a moment to chat in any questions that you have. Dashboards are very beneficial for companies to keep track of their goals. So in my business coaching program, we have the Gazelle's format of the one-page strategic plan, which is really a bigger 3-year strategic kind of look. And then I've built a dashboard, a spreadsheet tracking tool that we run in Excel, where we can see at a glance who's responsible for what and when, and then track our progress over time. So dashboards are critical. I won't get into any more detail on the dashboards. You have to be willing to test and measure to make this stuff work. It's not autopilot, and it's not, I was just in my hometown of Sharon, Pennsylvania, steel country, big giant steel mill sitting there. They ran the same way day in and day out for 30 years. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about needing to try different things and experiment. And if it works, great, keep doing it. And if it doesn't, stop doing it. Throw it out. Don't beat yourself up. Don't beat your team up. Move on to the next thing. All of the companies listed here as exponential organizations have gotten very good at how to master and learn from failure. So mastering failure is a key success factor to success, ironically. Autonomy. Valve is a software organization that has 300 people but no bosses. When I first heard this example, I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? No way. That's not possible. A client of mine insisted that I read a book called Reinventing Organizations. This is one you might want to write down. Reinventing Organizations. Here, I'll also put it in chat. And the author's name is Frederick Laloux, L-A-L-O-U-X. And this book is blowing my mind. There are a well-defined series, levels of human consciousness that began back when we were hunters out on the plains 50,000 and 10,000 years ago. And then our brain changed when agriculture came in, and then it further, our consciousness changed when we became, peasants, land, tied to specific land, and then modern urban structures grew. And so the first half of the book describes the levels of consciousness. The 1950s were marked by command and control, very hierarchical, rigid, the way the steel mill in Sharon, Pennsylvania still operates. And then in the 70s, you saw a rise of more postmodern organizations where people had a little bit of freedom and structure and some degree of autonomy, but still a fair amount of control. And now what you're seeing are these new kind of organizations which are completely different than anything that's ever existed before. And these aren't just high tech. There's a company out in California that processes 40% of all the tomatoes that you and I eat in America, and it's operated in this same bossless, autonomous structure. So I highly recommend this book, Reinventing Organizations, and it's really making me rethink what's possible and how to go about it. Gore-Tex is a company that's also known for its scale. They've figured out that you can keep 150 people organized pretty easily. You can fit them all in one room. You can provide unified messaging. You can keep a feel for the culture. But anytime you get more than 150, they split them off into a separate business unit. So W.L. Gore is the name of the company. They make Gore-Tex rainproofing and other things. They've come up with some very interesting ways of organizing and scaling. And in the book, Reinventing Organizations, they also talk in more detail about, in very concrete detail, not theoretical, very concrete detail. It's a brilliant book. So the final in the IDEA, I-D-E-A-S, the A stands for autonomy. And in my work with my clients, we're always looking for how do we create structures that give our people more autonomy. And ironically, more meetings give more autonomy, but they have to be the right kind of meetings. And in our meeting rhythms that we institute, we go off-site for 2 or 3 days a year to work on the business and not in it. And then we assign the accountability and the responsibility. And we monitor that responsibility on a monthly and weekly basis, but we bring it all the way down to the daily huddle where the intimate work group, the senior leadership team, each department, et cetera, on down, share information about their wins, areas in which they're stuck, and their focus for today. And through the implementation of the meeting rhythms, you actually have to spend less time in meetings because you can keep the pulse of things easier, and when things go wrong, you get an alert about it faster. And so creating the right meeting rhythms are critical to creating autonomy. Another part of autonomy is you have to hire people who function well in an autonomous environment, and not everybody does. So this goes back to what we'll be covering in the May First Fridays about hiring, making sure we have A players, how to implement top grading, how to create a core company culture so that we hire for people that have a strong cultural fit. These are all very, very important things that you must get right in order to scale up your organization. And that's why we focus on them. Social. So now we're internal. There are companies like Yammer. I think Yammer was bought by Salesforce. Salesforce has a capability. A number of the other big enterprise platforms have a social capability now where you can keep track of activities, files, etc. In Atlanta, the Atlanta Tech Village, a brilliant facility, you book your meeting rooms with an app. There's no more calling down to the receptionist and scheduling time. It's all in one central database, and it really takes no effort whatsoever. So just a minor example. So we want to be thinking about how can we leverage social technologies inside the company to speed up communication and give people the tools that allow them to be autonomous, but in a successful way. I'm still old school. I like eyeball to eyeball, sitting around the room, and that's why the meeting rhythms are so important. But if you get the meeting rhythms right and then you augment with some social technologies, that could be really beneficial. So just let me show you again the acronym for internal characteristics, dashboards, experiment, creating autonomy with the people, using social to knit everything together. And external, scale up using on-demand resources and leased assets, leverage the crowd as much as possible, look for algorithms. Algorithms don't always work. I mean, sounds sexier than it is. Another way to think of it, not just algorithms like computer algorithms that can go run on their own once you've coded them, but also systems. How can you systematize your business? The key pivot you'll make as a small business owner is the first time somebody else on your team brings in a new customer or a new piece of revenue without you knowing it. Then you know you're really building a machine. So algorithms don't just refer to computers, they refer to workflow systems as well. So I ran over today. I rarely run over, but I was so excited to share this all with you. I couldn't decide what to cut out, so I threw it all in. Everybody who joined the call is still on. I'm going to open the line, and we can continue our conversation. This is Jim Jubileer, Jubileer Results Group, and thank you for listening to First Fridays.